I'll look at you.
I'll move a chair.
You know, my eating disorder started
Don't worry, there'll be a lot of editing coming into this.
early.
I'm already filming.
When I was like 9 years old. I had from the time I was my earliest memories of
So,
5. You know, mom
one of
had a
the
fear of me turning
the thesis of my research paper on this project has been is mental illness an epidemic? And in that way, is mental illness spreading at a faster rate because of the media or because of the changes in society, things like that? But the underlying question being, is mental illness an epidemic? And however you define that, whether it's like as a contagion or as a societal sickness,
restrict my lunch.
can you speak a little bit to if you feel that there's kind of this like influx? Talk a little bit why? Well, because there's an influx, and
take back my power.
talk to like why
By choosing
you feel that way, and then also
as opposed to feeling
answer the question of is mental illness
control is, and I got information. My own personal. So my eating disorder, maybe it is. That is mental illness. Let me get sure I'm right. Mental illness and also maybe speak to the contagion of seeing others.
or that, or like speak to
stars that we athletics.
how you see
That
this
dies,
prevalence
she
and how you see it growing,
Several
and
years
you know
ago, several years
factors
ago,
that, but like just like broad, like besides just like the media, like other broad factors, and then
behaviors that show on camera. Okay, film. It was empowered. So change careers. What I've seen from those tricks from playing of how to do it.
And can you talk
Playing for that, playing soccer at a high level, and then just I was good at it, and I was great and coaching professionally before my career transition, which was inspired by, as I said, big in the 90s, recovery.
So what you experienced from dealing with
coming out and desire to actually protect my income, so said
families as well,
college athletics, but also then that also added growing, you know, I added idea issues, so all that was apparent in sports, in terms of young, I soccer athlete, lifesaver.
How it affects you, like how you
boys and girls, my mom got scared. You know, I told she me to girls because you know she
both as somebody on you know in your own recovery and as somebody
this idea. The idea was so really what I seen I had the thoughts as flashing. I ate is athletic to be female what's going on to eat. So by exercise, personal broad shoulder, that kind of strong legs, disorder eating. It is a arm was praised. It's a variety that conflicts with the idea in terms of gender. And so there's this competing gender and feeling of wanting there. But also for athletes, we need to be the best athletes, and different college again have the same idea in team exercise. You know, you see one teammate struggling to be able to do each, but you don't see them struggling at the time or each. So then that's initially it went on with performing similarly traits and equate like weight loss with got a concussion, and traumatic flex, you don't see the long college, you know, the longer picture where it ends. For many of those, I ended up having a red shirt, injuries, early retirement, burnout. So, and for you know 13-year-olds, 9-year-olds have their own experience and own recovery, feel like information full time and recognize, feel like recognition and eating disorder, eat this or not eat this. So be better at their teammates. That doesn't come from a naive, oh, she hasn't eaten, right? That comes from recognizing coaches. That comes from, it wasn't something that really, it was almost watching, thrown around colloquially, or like people throw around, oh, figure skating, so we're some kind of and or trying to, she has OCD, and it's like, until it's just that soccer doesn't come in, you have to think is they're both scared, but they address pop culture, pop psyche terms that are thrown out and kids understand the different issues. Nothing that really goes on, and just like because all these communities. So ideas of what's good. I still had this difficult feeling. It's difficult no matter what. Hey, a really and the idea for a while until I'm the best is such an American. Great athlete, I say myth and fantasy player, and so I had that image and the best. And silver is a good gold shape that I had to be considered on their side in high school and that lost pursuit and for things in sports. So for my background, I just didn't that's how I didn't give myself I say it. The idea I mentioned the idea of sport. My dad, sport in many ways part of that is like society. So in that same way, you see it in all different fields. So it can. And I didn't have the different advertising. The differences are already had being acceptable sort of in subtle orthorexia, the larger aspect. To me, it's just kind of being positive, being functional, full style, because it's like being functional anorexic. Didn't applaud them as even applaud. You don't have this certain ways turning themselves. They never want to look and how the different idea it's applauded just like I barely got any sleep. I worked so hard. I worked all these hours. Biggest difference care of myself. It's I didn't realize how, but it's applauded way somehow being. So I definitely can validate myself. Not that about this passes like but anything for you, because all you ever saw isn't okay, and that's the idea. So tying everything back to working was these ideas coalesced into basic personality, looking person, and just was basically struggling, being primed for an inability to be. So I expressed it. I had never been in therapy until psychological or a perfectionist, or so you never either have something that there was even fear of failure, or you accept depression, you just accepting failure. Those are the biggest changes in other communities that I knew about. Especially that early teammates, the kind of just like, oh, are you okay? But in a way of I'm scared to think around and all you do is that changes what everything illnesses do and mix well. Eventually, I was able to recover, but my recovery put these together again. I didn't get rid of that three-legged stool of exercising to earn the chance to eat so I can live, so that I can exercise to eat, and so on and so forth. I never got rid of that until several years later, while I was coaching in college, and that whole environment was eating disorder filled, or disordered eating, or eating disorder filled, and I was helping a lot of people with their eating disorders. My office was filled with people, like that would not filled, but it would just gradually come in somehow. Wrestlers or some friend, some teammate would tell. Some player would tell a teammate to come into my office and would talk, and so
that makes sense.
But I also was really having a hard time at the place where I was at, because I was isolated again, where I was coaching in a very middle of nowhere place, and I also was still struggling with my own identity as an athlete, because I was done playing at that point, and that's when it came back, and I took some coach's invitation to start. She saw me running, and she said, "Why don't we? We're training for a marathon. You should join in." And within, I loved training, and I turned into Forrest Gump within weeks, if not months. I was stuck on this. It said it was okay. It told me this training regimen on runnersworld.com, and by God, I qualified for the Boston Marathon in my first marathon, which is not okay. And even at the time, as sick as I was, I knew that wasn't okay. I knew in my heart that wasn't okay, that something was going on, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop the cycle until I went home. and people saw me, and saw the obsession, and saw that, I looked like a cross-country runner and not a soccer player. But, and I agreed to go in, I'm fast forwarding the story, but I agreed to go in to see that dietitian, who's actually now in private practice, who I saw when I was playing college. And so, I just said, just give me a meal plan, I'll be fine. But I wasn't. And then she said, well, I know who you should see. And then I got a therapist, and I was in the place, and I was ready for hell, but a hell that leads to a better life of my recovery. And that really dealt with the exercise issue as well. But what lied underneath that exercise issue was the myths around that started when I was 4 years old with my mom. And there was so much more support at that point than when I was 9, where it was never addressed except for a documentary or a biography about Karen Carpenter. At that point, I had heard about it a lot more. The internet, for example, was around before, but it was a lonely place for a very long time, where even my soccer team, at my college, there's only one other person we knew, or 2 other people that actually were said to have the eating disorder, but there were more than that. It was just not something you could talk about. So there.
Athletes, boys and girls, and I can speak namely to girls because I was coaching girls and young women. This idea, the ideals of what it is to be an athlete, clashing with what it is out in the media to be female. So broad shoulders, strong legs, and arms, and that conflicts with the idea of being a runway model, for example. And so there's this competing feeling of wanting to fit in, but also for athletes wanting to be the best athlete, and the contagion that happens is within teammates. You see one teammate struggling, but you don't see them struggling at the time. You see them initially maybe even performing better, and you equate weight loss with performance. The problem is you don't see the longer haul for, the longer picture where it ends for many of those athletes, which is injuries, early retirement, burnout. And for 13-year-olds, 9-year-olds actually, even younger, who feel like they can eat this or not eat this in order to be better at their sport, that doesn't come from a 9-year-old, right? That comes from coaches, that comes from the media, watching, whether it's figure skating in the Olympics or gymnastics, to as I said, soccer, or something that people think is somehow protective, of these issues. Unfortunately, at this point, it's not. It's no longer. Nothing is safe, because you have all these competing ideals of what's good and what's bad and what will create performance. And the idea of needing to be the best is such an American, I say myth and fantasy, but it is an ideal. It's woven into our fabric of be the best. Gold, silver isn't good enough. Gold is the only thing that you can get to be considered good. And that pursuit starts younger and younger with the professionalization of youth sports. So for my background in sports, that's how I see it in terms of, but the idea, I remember, the idea of sport in many ways recapitulates society. So in that same way, you see it in all different fields. So it can be in advertising, more and more eating, like eating disorders within the workplace being acceptable, disordered eating, orthorexia. To me, it's just kind of being a functional, same thing of being a functional alcoholic. It's like being a functional anorexic. It's applauded, but it's even applauded in many ways. Like, I want to, just the idea, actually, let me go back. It's applauded just like, I barely got any sleep. I worked so hard. I'm working all these hours. I'm not taking care of myself. Is what it really is about, but it's applauded for somehow being equated with hard work. Not that hard work isn't good, but anything overused isn't okay, and that's the idea that gets missed if I just keep working. And so these ideas coalesce into that personality trait of being being primed for an eating disorder. So the biological components and psychological components of being a perfectionist, or so you either have a fear of your fear of failure, or you accept depression, you end up accepting failure, and so you were primed for that early on, say with depression or predisposition to anxiety or OCD, different mental illnesses do mix well in a negative way, and so you put those together.
Okay, just gonna offer
Did that answer your question?
Yes, I'm gonna turn on you for the next part, which is a follow-up.
You could feel free if I didn't answer your question.
No.
Yeah.
It's what it really is here. I'm not recording it. I ask a question and then I see where, originally when I started doing all these interviews for every single type of person, I've interviewed a doctor, I've interviewed a family member, I had a set list of questions, but after my first interview, I realized there are certain questions to start off with, what's your name? And what is your involvement with eating disorders? But then everybody has a unique perspective that, for example, there's one girl I interviewed who had actually gone to Avalon the day that I left. So she knew who I was and she knew about me, but I'd never met her, so it was cool to meet her. She knew everything about me, which was really weird. But it was weird because interviewing her, I knew that she's been struggling a lot recently, and I was expecting to hear about that. And instead, I found out that her mom has an eating disorder, and I watched the way that she reacted about talking about it, and I was like, okay, this is what you're contributing to this documentary. Talk about this. It's yes, you have an eating disorder, but talk about what your family has done to you. And in a similar way, where it's you have this unique perspective of the athlete and what it's like to be an athlete and the pressure on an athlete that I haven't gotten yet in this. And so in a way, it's having you talk about that is what you seem to be most passionate about, and therefore it's what I want the most.
Okay.
So what you feel able to answer and what you say is what you feel, and that's what I want.
Okay.
So
all right.
Okay. So before I start filming, my follow-up question is going to be, do you feel like various mental illnesses to various degrees have become normalized in society? For example, it's okay to be OCD because it means you're a really neat person, or it's okay to be kind of sad, or it's okay to be anxious. I think specifically anxiety has been really normalized in the media, and with eating disorders, with eating disorders, it's okay, or it's good, it's fashionable, it's in style, because right now there's this whole healthy fad, but the healthy fad is still don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat that, don't eat this, and that's still a form of disordered eating. So I guess speaking to how you feel mental illness has been normalized, and then also I don't know when you had your eating disorder, but I'm assuming it was before the last 2 years or so.
Oh yeah.
What time period was that?
Well, different. I was initially my pediatrician when I was 9 told my mom I had anorexia. That was the first time, and then she took away soccer, and then I went, oh no, so I ate. I didn't really. That was enough to but I was doing what she wanted me to do.
Got it.
Right, and then it erupted.
Would that have been 80s, 90s?
Yeah.
Do do you want to talk a little bit
But
about
it erupted
how
in
you've
college, and then went away, and then came back right before my first attempt at grad school. But I was already down.
When was college?
College was 97 to 2001.
Okay. Do you think you would be able to, knowing that like you were fairly young, starting with your eating disorder, you'd be able to talk about how you've seen eating disorders change over time?
Yeah.
How you've seen the media perception change?
Okay.
Because that's a perspective I've been like trying to get, but not sure if anybody has.
Oh.
Not somebody has it.
Yeah.
Like, I interviewed Jeremy, and it was really hard because like Jeremy had so many other things to talk about, and like I wanted to get that out of him, but I wasn't able to. But now I'm gonna abuse you for that.
Okay. So I will say I will go with an aspect of when I was 9 and what I learned, because I learned from media. It was, I mean, my mom was the one that she projected her stuff on me, like a lot of moms do.
Right.
So,
You know.
I mean, love moms, but you know, they have their own stuff. And then I can go.
Yeah.
I have an idea how I'll do it.
Okay, go for it.
So, you know, my eating disorder started early, when I was 9 years old. I had, you know, from the time my earliest memories of 4, 5. You know, my mom really had a fear of me turning into her. She was overweight and she was obese, and she would constantly tell me that, you know, I just would always have to worry about my weight. I mean, this is 4 or 5 years old, and so it was always an issue. I knew food was something, according to her, I was always going to have to worry about. So those are my earliest memories of my relationship to food. By the time I was 9, you know, she would restrict my lunches, so I would feel really hungry, to the point of like I felt like I was starving. And I decided to take back my power by choosing to starve, as opposed to feeling like I didn't have a choice. It was control. And I got information. My eating disorder, rapid loss of weight started when I was, like I said, 9 years old, and I saw this documentary about Karen Carpenter, who was one of the first stars that we had heard of in the media that died, and she had died, you know, several years at that point, but not a long time ago at the point when I was watching it. And I learned from her behaviors they showed on camera in the film. It was not a documentary, it was a movie-based biography. And that's when I first started learning tricks of how to do it, of how to do anorexia, or whatever that was. I had no idea. And then I was good at it, and I got praised for it. My mom praised me for it. And also Oprah was big in the 80s, and her weight went up and down, but I remember her coming out, you know, really thin one season, said she went on a liquid diet, and that also added, you know, I added ideas. So all that culminated into my initial early on diagnosis of anorexia. However, I had soccer. It was my lifesaver. And my mom got scared. I could tell she was scared, and even though she had done a lot of things to encourage it, she said I couldn't play anymore if I didn't eat. So I really suppressed. I had the thoughts and I had the fears, but I ate in order to play. And it was based on, did I deserve to eat if I exercised enough? And that kind of disordered eating was okay. It was praised. I never got punished for it. You know, in terms of punished, my sport, my love taken away, my passion. From there, as I grew up, once I went to college, again, this same idea, I have to exercise to earn food, to be able to deserve to eat, so I can live, so I can play, so I can deserve to eat, went on. But when I got really hurt and I tore my hip flexor, got a concussion and tore my hip flexor at the end of my freshman year in college. I ended up having to redshirt, and then I isolated because now I couldn't exercise, so I couldn't earn the right to eat, and I further and further pushed myself. Now I was the only person. There wasn't a lot of information this whole time and recognition of eating disorders. No one ever talked about it. We would see teammates and people of like, yeah, oh, she has an eating disorder, but it wasn't something you really. It was almost thrown around colloquially, like people throw around, oh, she has ADHD or ADD, or she has OCD, and it's like, no, she's just neat. She doesn't have OCD. Like those are pop culture, pop psych terms that are thrown out when people don't understand the nightmare behind those issues that really goes on, just like with the eating disorder. So I ended up, I still had this feeling that I needed to prove myself that I was okay. I wasn't allowed to not be okay. I had to, I was always, a great athlete, and player and student. I had to keep that image up. So I didn't have time to mourn over, losses that I had. Like I lost my mom in high school. I didn't have time to mourn her or that loss or figure that out. There was things that I just didn't feel, I didn't give myself permission to do. And I say I didn't give myself permission because I don't think my dad was part of that. He didn't understand, he didn't get that role. So, and I didn't have college coach looking out or thinking about the eating disorder. He's very ignorant to it. I only ended up having a dietitian that was really the person who I attribute, so many positive things to my recovery for, because she's the only one that didn't see me as, oh, you don't have this certain weight to qualify, because I never looked the part, but I still had osteopenia, and I still was malnourished incredibly. But because I looked like a soccer player, I didn't look like a Holocaust victim. These stereotypes that followed us all the way. I definitely could never validate for myself about this diagnosis I got when I was 9, because all you ever saw in the media, tying everything back in a loop, was a concentration camp looking person who just was really emaciated, in other words. So I had never been in therapy until that point, and therapy for my home was just something that, it wasn't that it was even shamed, we just didn't know about it. But it was shamed in other communities that I knew about, and especially within my teammates. It kind of was like, oh, are you okay? Like, but in a way of like, I'm scared to be around you. So it was that shame factor, which I do think has improved. And eventually, I was able to recover, but my recovery was based on, again, I didn't get rid of that three-legged stool of exercising to earn the chance to eat so I can live. So then I can exercise to eat, and so on and so forth. I never got rid of that until several years later, while I was coaching in college, and that whole environment was eating disorder filled, or disordered eating and eating disorder filled, and I was helping a lot of people with their eating disorders. My office was filled with people needed, like that would not filled, but it would just gradually come in somehow. Wrestlers or some friend, some teammate would tell, some player would tell a teammate to come into my office, and I would talk. And so, but I also was really having a hard time at the place where I was at, because I was isolated again, where I was coaching in a very middle of nowhere place. And I also was still struggling with my own identity as an athlete, because I was done playing at that point. and that's when it came back. And I took some coach's invitation to start. She saw me running, and she said, why don't we, we're training for a marathon. You should join in. And within, I loved training, and I turned into Forrest Gump within weeks, if not months. I was stuck on this. It said it was okay. It told me this training regimen on runnersworld.com, and by God, I qualified for the Boston Marathon on my first marathon, which is not okay. And even at the time, as sick as I was, I knew that wasn't okay. I knew in my heart that wasn't okay, that something was going on, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop the cycle until I went home, and people saw me, and saw the obsession, and saw that, I looked like a cross-country runner and not a soccer player. But, and I agreed to go in. I'm fast-forwarding the story, but I agreed to go in to see that dietitian, who is actually now in private practice, who I saw when I was playing college. And, I just said, just give me a meal plan, I'll be fine. But I wasn't. And then she said, well, I know who you should see. And then I got a therapist, and I was in the place, and I was ready for hell, but a hell that leads to a better life of my recovery. And that really dealt with the exercise issue as well. But what lied underneath that exercise issue was the myths around that started when I was 4 years old with my mom. And there was so much more support at that point than when I was 9, where it was never addressed except for a documentary or a biography about Karen Carpenter. At that point, I had heard about it a lot more. The internet, for example, was around, unlike before, but it was a lonely place for a very long time, where my soccer team, at my college, there's only like one other person we knew, or two other people that actually were said to have the eating disorder, but there were more than that. It was just not something you can talk about. So, there. That.
So, my last question. So, the last question I have is, do you believe that a full recovery is possible? And to you, what does a full recovery look like? And then, do you believe that a full recovery sustained is in the vision for you? So those are the three ones.
So do I believe a full recovery is possible? And what is that? There's different definitions of recovery. For me, I always described it from my early treatment. When I was in college, I kind of thought about this metaphor of a stadium that's overcrowded and you can't hear your voice, and the stadium of people are really cheering against you. And over time, when you first notice that they're cheering against you, that's the start of recovery. Because before, you feel like they're with you, so there's no need for recovery. What is that? Then you realize that this is a full, huge stadium. How are you going to get everyone out? And you need the team, but you can't even see who, team being, you need help, you need collaborative help, not just professionals, but friends. But you can't even recognize them. You can't even turn to your left and see anybody, so you can get the noise out of your ears and accept the help. But once, but just recognizing them empties some people out of the stadium, and slowly, slowly you end up emptying the whole stadium. Especially once you can actually hear yourself think and hear your own voice. anytime you go back, you relapse or lapse, more people come back in. So there's this ebb and flow, and eventually it's more outward than in. In that case, when I think about that that's my definition of what recovery is. When that stadium is, there might be a janitor or a couple people in the stadium, but in a stadium is, as big as the Rose Bowl, you're not going to really even notice them or hear them. And that's what I call being recovered. But I never think the stadium is absolutely empty, but it doesn't affect you. But I do feel humble. Like, that's why the humility is what keeps me from saying it's full, it's out. No one's ever, the stadium is fully cleared, and no one's ever, there's no chance ever. I was too humbled by my recovery, and as I go, and being a Western woman, I think it's just fair that you just have to be, acknowledge that aspect, and know that, you're gonna have those bad days, but they're not the same as the bad days 10 years ago. And so you're gonna have the bad days, but they're not the same as the bad days 10 years ago. And you quickly kind of turn those bad days into hours. And nothing is comparable as it was 10 years ago. If that, so that is my definition of recovery. And if that means recovered, okay, then you know what I mean when I say recovered, and I'm recovered. So what time is it? Oh, gotta get going.
Alright, I will call that a day. I interviewed Mariana like 2 days ago, so she's like, she knows what's up. Quickly, I don't know if this would be like too difficult for you, but considering you seem in a pretty decent place, would you?
I'm very good place.
Okay, I was gonna say, you listen to us bitch and moan all the time, and there's
a
lot of bitching and moaning that goes on.
Well, the one thing the amazing therapist that I did have and worked with attribute a lot to. She told me when I was going back to grad school, don't look at eating disorders. Don't work on eating disorders for the next 7 years. She was the one who got me my job at CFD when I got back, so I knew I was ready. I was doing substance abuse for 7 years before that.
I didn't know you worked at CFD.
That's how I met Emily. Emily hired me on the spot.
When was that?
That was, I don't know if you just left.
I must have been gone.
It was 2007. 7.
Oh, okay. No,
Or was it 8?
I was there in